Hello again, everybody, and welcome to Tuesday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live, presented by Cadillac, the official luxury vehicle of the New York Football Giants. So glad you could be with us for the next hour. We'll talk Giants football at 201-939-4513. He's Matt Citak. I'm Paul Dottino. And, you know, it's funny, folks. This is the first week of the Phase 3, which involves OTAs and the mandatory minicamp, which actually won't be coming up until second week of June, in terms of the minicamp, that is. But, you know, it's a little bit of a dry period. Tomorrow, we're going to have to move the show. For those of you who listen to the program live at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time every weekday, tomorrow's program is going to move to 1:30 p.m. That's because of the Giants' OTA schedule. They've got their first media avail at their OTA sessions tomorrow morning. There's going to be a quick OTA practice. There's going to be Coach Dable. There's going to be media sessions with some of the players. So in order to bring you guys complete coverage of what happened tomorrow, what was said, what's going on here, we're going to move the show back an hour, and we will start at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow. You on the show tomorrow?
Yes, John and I.
Okay, so you guys are on tomorrow. 1:30 p.m. to 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow. So let's get that out of the way right away so you guys can kind of plan your lunch hours. I know a bunch of you like to hold off eating until the program starts. So 1:30 p.m. tomorrow for the live edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live. And as always, if you don't catch the show live, it's available on the archive, on podcast platforms everywhere, giants.com/podcasts, and the Giants mobile app. Okay, we got the business out of the way. Now we talk about the question of the day. Now, NFL.com just posted an article within the last couple of days. We were off over the weekend, and we had the Memorial Day, and I hope everybody had a pleasant holiday. And don't forget to obviously remember those who were lost in the military. In terms of our question today, the NFL.com article wanted to know, in the NFC, each of the teams have a most underappreciated player. Who is it? Well, Matt and I are going to go over the NFC East for the purposes of this program. We don't need to go through all the teams in the NFC. They've also done an AFC article as well. We don't need to do those. But I think the NFC East is appropriate, since that's where the Giants play 6 of their games during the course of the year. Very, very important games. And so we thought that we would kind of go through this, and perhaps you guys have some thoughts. Maybe you agree, maybe you disagree, maybe you have something else you'd like to talk about. We're okay with that too. But that's our question of the day. The most underrated or underappreciated, I think that's the word they used, appreciated. Most underappreciated player on each of the teams in the NFC East. Now, just because I don't want you guys to listen to us talk about the Giants and then click off the program, we're going to go in alphabetical order. Okay.
Before we just get into this, just real quick, just gotta acknowledge it that I think you might have said this. OTAs did begin today.
Yes.
There was a practice this morning. It was the team's first day back after a 4-day weekend. They also had Friday and yesterday off for the holiday. And as a lot of you may know, it is also the Giants Foundation charity golf outing this afternoon. So it was a very, very abbreviated practice. Not a whole lot, happened. That's why we didn't, start the show by letting you know everything that happened in practice.
It was not even a practice. Remember, no contact.
There's no contact allowed at all during OTAs, but today especially, there's nothing that we could even report to you about what happened. Like, it was more of I think just like a transition day, get the whole team or everyone that's here, get them back, get them sort of ready to go. Tomorrow is when things will really pick up. There's a full 2-hour practice. As Paul mentioned, Coach Dable will speak to the media before. Players will speak to the media after. Tomorrow, there'll be a lot more going on. There really is just not a lot to report. I didn't want you guys to think that we just decided to, forget about day one of OTAs. There's just nothing we could tell you guys of interest.
For veteran listeners who already know what OTAs are, that's fine. But you're right. There are new folks who may not understand this. The OTAs, and it's good that you actually brought this up, because that's known as an organized team activity, okay? You're going to get a month of these, but then in that third week, you get to have your veteran and mandatory minicamp where everybody's supposed to be here. Otherwise, they can be fined. That's the only week of this month period before everybody goes on summer vacation where they will have full gear on, and they'll actually run through plays with full gear.
Yes.
At this point, in all the other weeks of this phase 3 of these OTAs, they got shirts and shorts and helmets. The helmets look nice, okay? They look nice, but they don't serve a purpose because nobody can hit anybody.
Yeah, there's no contact allowed. As you just mentioned, this is the start of phase 3 of the off-season workout program, which is the final full phase. You know, we've had phase 1 began the week of the draft, got through phase 1, through phase 2. Now it's phase 3. The team is all together. The rookies are with the veterans. So, you know, most of the team is out on the practice field. Over the next 3 weeks, this week, next week, and the following week, there will be 10 OTA days, 10 days of practices, with today obviously being the first one. And each of those 3 weeks, there'll be 1 day of media. So Coach Dable will speak before the practice on that day. Players will speak after. For this week's schedule, the media day is tomorrow. And then I think the next 2 weeks, it'll be the next 2 Thursdays is when the media will be here. There'll be sort of a lot more for us to, you know, talk about and report about what is going on. But throughout these next 3 weeks, and even following the 3-week stretch, is the mini camp that Paul was just talking about. There is still no contact whatsoever allowed throughout these next 4 weeks of practices. So, you know, you'll hear from us, you'll hear from the beat reporters when they're here about, you know, some one-on-one matchups between receivers and cornerbacks, tight ends,
but
safeties.
relax. It's very preliminary.
Take everything you hear over the next few weeks, including from us, with a little bit of a grain of salt, because there's zero contact allowed. There's really not much you can gain from the offensive lineman or defensive lineman at all during this stretch. You like to see the guys just out there and moving around, you know, looking agile and quick, but until they, especially those guys, until they can really start going at it with pads on, which is not until the start of training camp in about 2 months, there's not a whole lot to gain. You will be able to get a little bit more from, you know, the receiver, tight end, and defensive back matchups
positions.
But again, you got to keep in mind that even those matchups, there's still no contact allowed. So it's not like the corners can, you know, press the receiver at the line of scrimmage before they run out. So just take everything you hear over the next couple of weeks with a little bit of a grain of salt.
So we will actually be moving the show back on those media available days to 1:30 in each of those cases, but don't worry about that now. We will tell you about that as the days come closer. We will let you know. For this week, there's only one show that gets moved. That one's going to be tomorrow.
Yep.
Okay. Now, back to the question at
Yes.
hand. 201-939-4513 if you'd like to give us a call. So we'll go alphabetically, and the Dallas Cowboys, being that they're a D, they get to be first in this conversation. And the NFL.com article selects wide receiver Jalen Tolbert. Now, I can appreciate that because CeeDee Lamb gets all the ink, right? Their wide receiver room has the one true superstar, and then everybody else is kind of a second level also ran. At least that's the perception.
Well, they did just
So
trade
I get it.
George Pickens, who
Well,
they
that's-
hope to elevate that number 2
I was
spot.
just getting there.
Sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. I was just getting there. They have since added George Pickens from the Steelers, who now is going to be part 2 of this sensational duo that the Cowboys hope to deploy this season. I looked at it and I said, no. For me, it's Jake Ferguson. Ferguson, in my opinion, is one of the top all-around, full-service tight ends in the National Football League. I loved him coming out of school. It does not surprise me that he has produced well and wrestled the starting job away in Dallas. He's a quality player who's got terrific hands, runs really good routes, can get yards after the catch. He blocks. He's not afraid to get his nose dirty and do the dirty work. Okay, so he's not Jason Witten. I get that. The standard in Dallas for tight ends, going back to Billy Joe Dupree and even Mike Ditka before that, is very, very high, okay? I totally understand that. And that's why I'm going to go Jake Ferguson as the most underappreciated Cowboy because, again, with a high standard for tight ends in that organization, he has not necessarily been an all-pro, all-NFL guy, and so I'm going to say he's the one for me.
Yeah, that is a good pick. He was very solid last year. Honestly, the last 2 years, 2 years ago, he was even better than last year. Last year he missed a little bit of time. I forgot what injury he had, but
He was banged up.
Yeah, that is a good pick. Just in terms of Jalen Tolbert, that was actually my pick for the Cowboys breakout player last year. And obviously that did not come to fruition. He wasn't, awful, but certainly did not come close to breaking out. Maybe this year, now that he's the third receiver and potentially the fourth option in the passing game, because I would put Ferguson above him on the pecking order, maybe he has a little bit more of a breakout. But I agree with you. That's not the pick for most underappreciated player for me either. There were a couple of players I considered. Jake Ferguson was one. Since you went with him, I'm going to steer away from that.
No, you can.
There's another player who I do think is underappreciated, but he's not going to quite get this because he's not been his normal self the last couple of years, and that's Javonte Williams, the running back that they just signed for the Broncos.
Okay.
He had a serious injury 2 years ago, was coming back from it last year, still played the whole season, but did not look as spry and as quick as he did to start his career. I do think he's going to have a much better season this year than last year, but since he's had a couple of down seasons, I'm not going to go with him either. I'm going to go with Dante Fowler, who they just signed to a 1-year deal this offseason. He was with, I want to say, Washington before this.
He's bounced around a bit and had some very good seasons and some very quiet seasons.
Yeah, so he was with Washington last year, but was with the Cowboys the 2 years before that. And the reason I think he's being a little bit underappreciated is his 2 years in Dallas, he had 10 total sacks between the two seasons. Last year with the Commanders,
double digits,
10.5 sacks.
Yep.
And this is a guy who has reached double-digit sacks in his career previously as well. He had one season with the Rams. He had 11.5. And now that he's going to be on the opposite end of the line from Micah Parsons, who will obviously be garnering the most attention from opposing offensive lines, will be getting double-teamed, probably more passing plays than not. Dante Fowler is going to just get himself a lot of one-on-one situations. And if he has a season even close to what he had last year with the Commanders, but now playing on the opposite end of Micah Parsons, he could easily be looking at another double-digit sack season.
And the rest of the league were not like that very much.
No, especially the Giants were not like that at all.
Yeah, he wound up, coming back from, as you said, 2 subpar seasons and did some really good things for Washington last year. Quite frankly, I thought he was one of the bright spots and surprising spots for the Commanders' defense.
I'm with you.
All right, so now we go to next up, and that would be N for the New York Giants. And the article suggests Jermaine Illuminor. And I understand that. He's not a guy who gets a lot of headlines, who gets a lot of attention, and yet is very workmanlike. Just goes out there every single week and does his job, and he's very reliable. But for me, I'm looking at a guy who I think has a little more pop and a little bit more value and a little bit more luster in terms of where he's usually talked about and rated. And I'm going to go with Darius Slayton. I think that Slayton this past offseason, and by virtue of the contract that he got, you'd have to say he was one of the more highly regarded wide receivers around the league in free agency because he got a pretty good deal to stay with the Giants.
Yep.
Most people don't look at him that way. Most people look at him like, oh, well, he'd be a number 3 on many of the good teams in the league. Or maybe he'd be a 4. I hear that a lot from people. I look at Darius Slayton and I say, look, he's got pretty good size. He's got really good speed. He's a pro's pro, despite the fact that the Giants' passing game has not exactly been prolific over the last several years. He still goes out there as Mr. Consistency and averages 15 yards a catch for his career. Now, I defy you to just go out into any supermarket shelf and pick a 15-yard per catch receiver at will off of that shelf. It does not happen every day. So I would say I'm going to go with Darius Slayton, although I do think there is a segment of Giants fans who do appreciate him. So for those of you, he would not be a good pick. But for those of you who do not necessarily appreciate him and kind of see him kind of buried underneath the rubble of the Giants' passing attack. I think he's a good pick.
Yeah, no, I think so too. And I know I briefly mentioned this to you right before we came on air, but ESPN put an article out, and they picked the most underrated player at each position across the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
And at the wide receiver position, they went with Darius Slayton as the most underappreciated wide receiver in the entire NFL. There was a word you used when talking about him, and I'm glad you chose that word, consistent, because he has been the model of consistency since the Giants drafted him in the 5th round of the 2019 draft. Every year after year, he has proven to be, that downfield option, the guy that can stretch the top off the defense, take the top off the defense. He's just been consistent ever since, I think it was the rookie minicamp after he got drafted. It was a huge storyline that he had a lot of drops in that 2-day minicamp.
Mm-hmm.
Since then, drops have not really been an issue. Obviously, he's had a couple here and there, of course.
He's had some inconsistencies in terms of his hands, but his play overall has been very consistent.
His play has been very consistent. The drops, I don't think, have been a big issue.
Not as much
years.
as with other receivers.
Yeah. So I do like that pick. I'm going to go in a slightly different direction. I do think Jermaine Illuminor is underappreciated by many people around the league because, especially last year, whether it was starting at right tackle, where I know we've spoken a lot about the first 6 weeks of the season.
Mm-hmm.
Offensive line was healthy. Andrew Thomas was healthy. They had the same offensive line for every single snap over the first 6 weeks. Well, during those first 6 weeks, Jermaine Illuminor did not give up a sack. Did not give up a single sack. Obviously, Andrew Thomas got hurt in that Week 6 game, missed the rest of the season, and things started to crumble on the offensive line from that moment. But Jermaine Illuminor was very solid. Even after he got switched to play on the left side with not too much time to he spent all offseason training first for guard, then for right tackle, and then halfway through the year he got thrown to the other side where he hadn't trained at all at left tackle.
It was a tough spot for him.
Yeah, and he was still very solid. So I can't, dismiss NFL.com for choosing him.
No,
because it's a very fair pick.
Yes.
I'm going to go with one that I know those watching, you and I, we certainly do not underappreciate him.
Your favorite player, right?
But the fact that he is not thought of as one of the best at his position across the NFL baffles me because when he's been on the field, he has been nothing short of dominant, and that is Andrew Thomas.
Okay, wow.
I know you and I both consider him to be one of the best tackles when he's healthy in the NFL.
Sure.
And I know a lot of you watching at home or wherever you're watching probably agree. Granted, he's had injury issues. He's missed some time, especially the last 2 years. He's missed a lot of time.
Mm-hmm.
But in the stretches of the last 2 years where he has been on the field, he looked like that 2022 Andrew Thomas, the one that was a second-team All-Pro.
Right.
2 years ago, he missed basically the entire first half of the season. Took him a little bit of time to get going once he came back. But the final month of the season, he was that dominant All-Pro version that we grew accustomed to in 2022. Last year, the first 6 weeks of the season, really the first 5 weeks, because he got hurt at some point during that Week 6 game and didn't quite look himself for the rest of that game. But the first month plus of last year looked like the normal Andrew Thomas. And now, because he's had these 2 injury-riddled seasons in a row, it seems like he is just being criminally underrated by just about everyone across the media, across the. I'm sure teams are not, undervaluing him because they know what he can do when he's out there.
You threw me a curveball. I thought you were going to go with Greg Van Roten.
I do love Craig.
I know you do.
You know I love
He's
Craig
your guy.
Roden.
He is your guy.
I know. I almost went with him, but then I realized, I'm like, wait, I've literally, I look for articles every day to write about Giants now, just topics about the Giants,
right.
Players being highlighted. No one ever talks about Andrew Thomas.
Okay.
On any of these media outlets. And it annoys me because we know how good he is and how dominant he is when he's on the field. I think he just needs to have one of those seasons where he just is able to stay on the field because we all know what he can do when he stays out there. Hopefully that will be this year because as we've come to learn, when he's healthy and he's out there, the offensive line as a whole plays significantly better, which is no surprise because he's our best lineman.
So you're taking some of the philosophy also that I use with Slayton in terms of where the guy should be and where he's kind of talked about.
Yes.
Slayton should be valued much higher, and I think people
100%.
around the league value him higher inside the league more than people outside the league.
Yep.
And that perhaps is what you're talking about with Thomas.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was just after the 2022 season, which obviously he was an All-Pro, where the media was considering him one of the top tackles in the league. Just because he's had some injuries, which the injuries he's had, it shouldn't, alter the rest of his career.
Mm-hmm.
He, should be back healthy. We hope we should be back healthy at the very least for the start of training camp, if not sooner. So there's no reason to think that he can't return to his 2022 version.
All right, let's go to next up, the Philadelphia Eagles. By the way, dial us up at 201-939-4513. The Philadelphia Eagles, defensive tackle Moro Ojomo gets the pick from NFL.com. And I understand that they wanted to go with Milton Williams, who left because of free agency. And you guys know coming out of the draft, I was a huge Milton Williams fan. So never underrated here, but it doesn't matter now. He's not on the Eagles anymore, so he's not eligible for this particular column. So they decided to go with Ojomo, talking about his efficiency in terms of his pass rush snaps and how well he did in those particular plays. I get that, but for me, I'm looking at Nakobe Dean and Zach Baun, two of their starting linebackers, who both got accolades this year, but because they hadn't done much in the previous 2 or 3 seasons in the NFL, I kind of think that maybe their impact on this particular Eagles team, with all of the superstars that they have up front, and with all of the superstars they have on offense, I kind of thought that they were both underappreciated. And you can pick either one of them. Because even though I believe, if I'm not mistaken, wasn't Dean one of the comeback players of the year? And I think Baun made first team AP All-Pro, did he not?
Baun was first team All-Pro for sure. He was probably the best linebacker in football last year.
Yeah. Now,
him and Fred Warner.
If I said to 20 people out in the parking lot, if I went out there and talked to the construction workers who were doing the World Cup town setup for the club soccer that's coming here, and I grabbed 20 of those guys and I said, give me the top 5 linebackers in the NFL, his name's not coming up.
No, probably not.
It's not.
It should, but it's not.
So by definition, does Baun become that guy for this category? Because until this breakout season where he had 150 plus tackles, he was nobody.
Yeah, and honestly, I was talking to a friend who is a huge Eagles fan. I do have one of those. I'm sorry. But
I'm just surprised you let him live.
But I was talking to him about Zach Baun, I think it was during the playoffs, and he told me that Zach Baun was signed basically to be a special teams player. Mm-hmm. That the Eagles, when they first signed him, did not really have much thought or consideration on him starting at linebacker, let alone, getting a lot of snaps at that position. And it was Vic Fangio that once he had him in the building was like, wait a second, I think we might have something here. And sure enough, again, was one of the best, if not the best linebacker in football, and got a new contract this offseason where he's getting paid like one of the top players at his position, and it is deserved. But you're right that, before this season, not only would he be nowhere in the ballpark of the conversation for top linebackers, but he wouldn't even considered a starting linebacker, really.
Well, I think if you went to 20 people before this past season, they would have had a hard time telling you if he was still in the league.
Yeah.
After 4 years in New Orleans and doing nothing.
100%.
So I think right now you'd still have a hard time getting people telling you that he was an All-Pro. So
You're right.
I'm going to go there. And
fair.
it's a twisted piece of logic, but that's where I'm going to go.
That is totally fair. I would say similar to how I imagine people actually working in the NFL across other teams know the ability of Andrew Thomas. I feel like in that sense, they would agree with you on Zach Baun, but you're right that the media, a lot of fans definitely do not give Zach Baun the respect that he deserves. For me, I mean, again,
Where do you want to go?
It's the reigning Super Bowl champions. Like it's
hard, right?
It's hard to say that any of these guys are underrated.
Is.
So I'm gonna go with someone who has not played a single snap for them yet, but who I'm just because I'm not really sure what other direction to go on. Like, I think Jalen Carter could easily become one of the top defensive tackles. He's not quite there yet, but he could become that this year. I don't want to go with him, though.
You can't pick a rookie. You're not going to pick a rookie, are you?
I wanted to take a rookie. Is that kind of cheating?
Well, I think it is, because if he's not in the NFL yet, how could he be appreciated or underappreciated?
It seems like
all right. If you want to go ahead, I'll let you cheat. Go ahead, take the rookie. Go ahead.
Cheat.
Who do you want to take?
I'm going to cheat. I'm going to go with the Eagles' first-round pick, Jihad Campbell, because it seems like he's not being considered the favorite to be their starting middle linebacker going into the season. And
well, look at the two guys we just mentioned.
Well, I think he might overcome Nakobe Dean. That's why I want to potentially go with him.
Okay.
And this is nothing against Nakobe Dean. I just think Jihad Campbell was extremely talented and skillful this past season playing at Alabama. I think the only reason he dropped all the way down to the Eagles at 31 was because he has some injury concerns.
Mm-hmm.
There's some, potential red flags. Some teams clearly flagged him as, an injury risk moving down the road, but he was the best linebacker in football last year, if not the best in college football. If not the best, certainly top 3. I think he is just the perfect complement to Zach Bond in Vic Fangio's defense, and it scares me a little bit as a Giants fan and employee thinking about Jihad Campbell coming into the league and developing next to Zach Bond with Vic Fangio as the defensive coordinator. I mean, obviously, the defensive front is what gets all of the attention in Philadelphia. But between those two guys and Nakobe Dean, those are 3 very, very talented linebackers that I feel like could start. Any of the 3 of them could and would start for most teams around the NFL.
And I've looked at their linebacking core, and I'm not talking edge because the edge is a different position now. I've looked at their linebacking core, and I have felt now for several years that's been a weak link for them, in my opinion. They have not been very athletic, making too many tackles after yardage gained, not making too many impact plays. And all of a sudden now, last year, they had 2 guys who really stepped up, and now they had Campbell. All of a sudden, that position isn't so weak anymore.
No, and combine them with the defensive front, that is a very scary front 7 right there.
It is.
And obviously the secondary there's no slouches back there either.
Well, they've already retooled it.
Yeah, between the 2 high picks last year, that alone transformed their secondary. Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean, who were their first 2 picks last year. We knew when they drafted them last year, we're like, this could be trouble for the rest of the NFC East. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened.
All right, 201-939-4513. We have a phone caller, so why don't we go there before we go to the Commanders? And we will take this phone call here. And you are first, Chris. Welcome to BBKL. Hello.
Hey, Paulie, how's it going? Matt.
Hey, what's going on?
I just wanted to start off and say that you guys know I've been listening for a long time, and I just took it for granted because of the info, the calls, like all the material that we get. Well, my old lady's a Bills fan, and she wanted some draft info, and so I looked up on the Bills app, and it is like a 2 out of 10 compared to where you guys are like a 9.5 out of 10. And I don't even know what suggestions make up the 0.5. That's how bad they were and how good you guys were.
Well, you're very kind.
Thank you. We appreciate that.
Yeah. And then, so now that's said, Paulie, John, I'm kind of disappointed a little bit in you guys with your guys' like, it's not pessimism.
Well, we got Matt here with us today, okay?
Right. That's why I didn't mention him. Well, I didn't get the thing for like Schmelke, Paulie, Dots, Mr. Citak, Lance, Pearson.
You go. The whole crew. Yeah, okay.
The whole group.
All right. So you want to hit us now with something negative. Go ahead.
Yes. I didn't mention Citak in this because he seems to have the optimism and actually feel it. And I know you have it, Paulie. That's why I'm kind of disappointed in you and Schmelke.
Okay.
Like, I think that you guys believe it and you feel it, but it's just a little bit worried because of the last couple of seasons, which leads me into my third point. So, Early and Shane and Dable, yes. So early on in Shannon Dabo's tenure, we didn't have great depth. So the Thomas injury and all the rest that derailed that season. And then the next season, he brings in Illuminor, he brings in Runyon, had a great offseason and draft. And then he gets Burns. And then had the excellent draft again. So what was that? The last two drafts were really good. The first one there, was that the Thomas and was that the Kayvon draft? 3 years ago.
Kayvon was drafted with Evan Neal.
Kayvon and Evan Neal was Joe Shane and Brian Dable's first draft in 2022.
They had 2 first-rounders that year.
I know, and that seems to be like the worst draft that they've had so far. But anyways, we've had two really good off seasons, and then he brings in Adebo. He brings in Holland. Where the heck was I? Give me 1 sec.
Well, I just want to make sure we back up to point number 2 for a second. You're accusing all of us except for Matt of being like Debbie Downers, like
not that much, Paulie.
Here's what I would tell you.
Optimistic
okay.
as you feel inside.
Here's what I would tell you. I've been around the game such a long time that I know you can't start eating the ice cream, okay, until you actually see the stuff coming out of the freezer. And it's not coming out of the freezer yet. Heck, they're not even in pads. So, I can't start jumping for joy and ordering, 3 whole double cheese pizzas because they haven't even hit yet. I'm sorry. I can't be too glowing about this. What I see on paper is good. It's really good. I think the improvement is going to be there. But the point that I think John and I have often tried to make is that this team could be much better. And the 1-loss record may not necessarily reflect it as much as the team improves. That's the thing to be wary about. It really is.
I'm just saying, I've been listening to you guys for years and years. So I know, like, your personalities and your day-to-day, sometimes you guys are, have a bad day or whatever. You can tell the difference. I just feel like you're not as optimistic as you feel inside. That's all I'm saying, Paulie.
Okay, fine.
All right, here, this one, though, and then...
I want to be optimistic.
Yeah, and I'm going to give you reasons why. We will win that game. Great year. Okay, so if last year Malik Neighbors doesn't drop that pass in the second game in the fourth quarter with, a minute 50 left, I believe we win that game in Washington. The Cowboys have a rookie head coach, offensive coordinator, and defensive coordinator, and plus they've got, 3 or 4 either rookies or second-year offensive linemen that got attend with the Giants' defensive line for a year or two. Against Golson, Dax, KT, Burns, Alexander, and now Carter. So, we got depth. We got depth at the defensive line, and they're going to be a problem. He's going to find the right mix with that, with those guys. I think that we're going to be top 3 in sacks, which will lead to top 3 in turnover ratio. We've got Brian Dable's been assistant coach of the year. He's been head coach of the year, and now he's got Wilson. And I just think Wilson and Neighbors are going to be a great match. It wouldn't shock me at all if Neighbors has 20 touchdowns this year.
All right. Now, the only thing I'm going to ask you to pump the brakes on a little bit here is to give Neighbors 20 touchdown catches. That's kind of like out of this world. But if you want to go there, I'll go right ahead. I think that's rather overzealous. But the one thing that you did say that you really can't do is predict turnover ratio. No matter how much pressure you think they're going to get on the other team's quarterback, we know, history tells us in the National Football League, that while you can force other teams' quarterbacks into making mistakes, it doesn't necessarily mean you will convert those mistakes into turnovers every time.
I mean, all we got to do is look at last year. The Giants were the top team in the league in sacks for the first half of the season, but had almost no turnovers, no interceptions, and only a few forced fumbles. So despite the fact that they were leading the league in sacks, the turnovers didn't necessarily follow. Now, that doesn't mean that's going to happen every time, but just because they get more sacks does not necessarily mean that a ton of more turnovers will come as well.
So you got to kind of pull that one back, I think, to be real.
Well, now I'm going to push back. We got Holland, Paulson Adebo, and Newman is in his second year. That's 3 ball hawks with the pressure that, and now we got Abdul Carter with Alexander. The whole thing is going to be, if we stop the run, we are going to be dominant. If we can stop the run, we're going to be dominant. That's the key. And how Wilson is with, I mean, he's got Hyatt, Slayton, great trackers of the ball. He's got like his perfect wide receiver core for his type of passing, you know. And then Scatabo with Theo coming into his second year. Maybe I'm too optimistic, but I actually had him breaking Randy Moss's single season wide receiver touchdown with that Brady and him. So it was over 20, Paulie. Even though you didn't like the 20, I got it breaking.
Wow. I mean, wow. That is a big number.
Will not be covered.
That is a big, big, big number. 20 touchdown catches in a season?
I think it's 23.
No, you just said 20. You just said Neighbors for 20.
Yeah, Neighbors, I got him breaking Moss's record this year.
I mean,
it's his stop and go. That mixed with the comeback with Russell Wilson, a guy that's accurate. Yeah, DJ was underthrowing everybody. He just was not the same. Now,
okay, hey, look, I love what you're saying, and if that happens, there's going to be a lot of cheering at the stadium right across the parking lot. Trust me. That's going to be awesome. I think that's being rather generous. I mean, look at some of the quarterbacks and some receivers who have played for this organization. You know, Amani Toomer, Plexico Burress, Homer Jones, going back several decades, who was one of the biggest, if not the greatest deep threat in the history of the National Football League. None of these guys put up 20 touchdowns in a season.
I mean, again, going back to last year, the player that led the league in receiving touchdowns was Jamar Chase, who had obviously Joe Burrow as his quarterback. Jamar Chase, one of, if not already, the best receiver in the NFL. He had 17 touchdowns. And that's with, and again, I do think Russell Wilson certainly raises the floor for Malik and the rest of the Giants receivers, but I don't think anyone's going to confuse Russell Wilson out there with Joe Burrow in his prime right now. And again, Jamar Chase only had 17.
Let me ask you guys a question. Do you think Russell Wilson is capable with Malik Neighbors to break the record? Do you guys believe he's capable?
I think Neighbors has the ability and the talent to be incredibly explosive, and I do believe that Wilson still has the arm and the accuracy to get the ball there. But I also believe that the Giants are a team that is not going to just feature those two guys. They're going to try to spread the ball around. You mentioned a couple of the other fellas, including Hyatt and Slayton, who are also going to get their share. You mentioned Scatteraboo. Well, if you want him to wind up running the ball some and you want Tracy to run the ball some, there's one ball. There's one ball.
Yeah,
and you're talking about spreading it.
That's where I'm going back to. I really think the Giants are going to – people are grossly underestimating the coaching, the talent that's on the team, and the depth now.
The Giants would be best served.
Wilson triggered me last week. That's why I wrote. That's why I.
All right, but Chris, the Giants would be best served, in all honesty, if they're able to be a diverse offense that can spread the ball around a lot to a number of these talented players, and they allow Daboll's creativity in conjunction with Kafka and Tierney, and of course the veteran pulling the trigger and Russell Wilson. They'd be so much better off if they could be play action and diverse than just featuring long balls, every third play to Malik Neighbors.
No, I'm not saying that, but Malik Neighbors is more than that. I'm saying the tandem of his stop and go move with the comeback, is going to give him. Nobody's going to be able to cover. Nobody can cover him now. I personally think he's the best receiver. He does stuff that is incredible with his, whatever you call it, the balance in the air, keeping his toes in, his awareness.
Incredible athleticism. There's no doubt about that. Look, Chris, I will say this, right? Any Giants receiver who can put up double-digit touchdown catches in a season after what we have watched for the last how many years would be welcome.
Yeah, 109 catches.
Oh, yeah. 100%.
You know,
and he's certainly capable
freaking
of double-digit touchdowns.
Sure.
And we're not gonna sit up here and say, "Oh, that's unrealistic to think he can't reach double digits."
But he's doubling down.
That he
though.
certainly can. He had 7 last year with obviously some, we'll call it subpar quarterback play. With improved quarterback play, easily could get 10 or more. But to predict 20. To break like a record,
if he called
it's a tall task.
Chris, if you called in and said 15, I would even say that's probably a tad high, but I could digest 15.
It's possible.
20 just seems way out of whack.
I just don't think he's going to be covered. This is his second year now.
Okay.
He was great in his first year with just terribleness around him. Except
All right,
for Tracy,
Chris,
the line got injured.
Thank you, Chris. We got other people trying to get into the show. I appreciate it. Please do call again.
Thank you, Chris.
Wow.
I appreciate optimism, of course.
Hey,
100%. The one thing I'm a little curious about is he said that I have been the most optimistic, which I try in general, especially this time of year, to lean a little bit more towards the optimistic side than the pessimistic side, because I do think the roster is just significantly better this year than it has been for years now. On paper, the roster is better. Obviously, a big factor in the success of this team will be health, as it is every year. 2022, team was relatively healthy, and what happened? They went on this playoff run. The next 2 years, we saw various key players on both sides of the ball drop like flies, and with them dropping like flies, the season dropped like a fly, and it was over before we knew it. It was week 6, and the season's basically over already. So health will definitely play a big factor in that. But I feel like I have been pretty consistent with my messaging on here, saying that I do think, along with you and John, I think we all agree that the Giants should be a lot better this year. But as you said, they could be a lot better and still only win 6 or 7 games.
Sure.
I have said that there's an outcome for this season where they only win 6 or 7 games, and yet at the end of the season, all of us, including you at home, are still feeling optimistic about the way that the team is going.
Correct.
Because they only won 3 games last year. To think just because of, a quarterback change, which obviously most important position in football, and it will help raise the floor of the offense, which in turn will help raise the floor and just help the defense in general. But even with that, to think that they're going to go from 3 to, 10 or more wins in one offseason, that's going to be very difficult. That does not happen often. It happens sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
It's certainly possible, but I don't know if, Tuesday, May 27th, anyone can sit up here and say with confidence that they predict that will happen.
Look, I think one of the reasons that they drafted Cam Scatterbo is because they wanted to have a power running back in that room to match with Tyrone Tracy so that they could be more diversified offensively. And they want to improve the running game's production.
100%.
Well, when you get in the other team's red zone, if you've got that running game to keep the defenses honest, and especially when you get inside the 10 or inside the 5, and you can prove to people that you can run the ball in, well, I hate to say it, but Malik Neighbors and those other receivers are going to get some fewer chances to score if Scatterbo and Tracy are running the ball in.
Without a doubt.
Which, by the way, is a good thing.
Yeah, we'd all sign up for that in a heartbeat.
So don't get caught up too much in trying to see Neighbors' numbers reach for the stars. I don't necessarily know that is a productive way to think in terms of the overall offense's scheme and picture.
No, but don't get us wrong. Malik Neighbors, his numbers are going to look good.
Incredible talent.
Assuming he stays healthy and the quarterback play is just consistent. I'm not even saying it has to be, above average quarterback play. Just solid, consistent quarterback play with Malik staying healthy. And there's no reason to think why he couldn't have another season like he did as a rookie, if not better, because he's now obviously has a full year of experience in the NFL.
I think he will
under his belt. So the numbers will be there.
Yeah.
What Paul is saying, and I agree completely, is just don't get caught up in saying 20 touchdowns for Malik Neighbors. Malik Neighbors could end the season with 6 touchdowns, but if he has 1,500 yards and 120 receptions, is anyone really going to complain and say that he had a bad season? Especially if the offense is still scoring, it's just maybe not necessarily going into Malik's hands into the end zone. As long as the offense is scoring points, who cares who's the one that crosses the goal line with the ball?
Exactly.
All it matters is the offense is scoring more points than it has the last
Win the
couple
games. Win the game.
That is the most important thing.
Just win the game.
Scoring more points will help with the winning.
I'm certainly not interested in fantasy football and fantasy football points. I know you may be.
I do like fantasy football, but as I tell my friends all the time, anyone that asks me, the Giants come first. I will take going 0-13 in my fantasy league in a heartbeat if it means the Giants win more games.
Exactly.
Without a doubt.
All right, back to our question of the day. Our number 201-939-4513. We are talking about the most underappreciated player on each team in the NFC East. For the Washington Commanders, NFL.com says Jartavius Martin, their young safety, who has done yeoman work, and I would agree with this, because if I asked anybody out on the street to name the starting safeties on the Washington Commanders, nobody is mentioning Martin.
No.
Nobody. His name is totally going to get lost, and yet when you look at his stat line, and NFL.com presents it very well. Last year, 87 tackles, 3 forced fumbles, 3 passes knocked down, an interception, and apparently 2 separated shoulders that he played with as well. Hard for anybody to dispute that call.
Yeah, that's fair. So that's who you're going with?
I will go with that. I agree with them. They sold me on that one. I could not find a reason to go off the road after they put him up for the nomination.
No, that's fair. I can't even say I disagree, because that is a great pick. I was considering 3 different players. I chose one, but real quick, the 2 I considered that I did not go with, 2 longtime NFL veterans, Zach Ertz and Bobby Wagner.
Okay.
Who, despite being pretty high up there in age, especially for their respective positions, Ertz is 34, Wagner is 34.
Oh, man.
Yet Wagner is coming off a season in which he was a second-team All-Pro.
Yeah, exactly.
And somehow is the most... We talked about Darius Slayton being consistent for the last, 6 seasons? Bobby Wagner's been doing it since he got into the league in 2012. Basically every single year. I don't know how he does it.
Retire already, will you please?
Year.
Go away.
It doesn't matter what team he's on. He obviously had the long stretch with the Seahawks, spent a year with the Rams, didn't miss a beat. Went back to Seattle for a season, picked up right where he left off.
Yep.
Followed Dan Quinn to Washington, was an All-Pro in his first year in Washington. How he continues to do it every year, I don't know. He's a first ballot Hall of Famer in my head. So I considered him because despite him coming off as a second-team All-Pro selection, it feels like no one really talks about him or appreciates him for what he's done for such a long time and continues to do. And then in terms of Zach Ertz, he just had a huge bounce-back year after a couple of subpar seasons in a row, having 654 yards.
He was buried in Arizona.
Yeah, that's true. 7 touchdowns, 66 catches, was a huge security blanket for Jaden Daniels, and was a big reason why Jaden Daniels had the success that he had as a rookie last year. So I just think Ertz deserved a little bit of recognition there too. But the guy who I'm going with, who, granted, I did cheat a little bit in this conversation last year, because when we were talking about breakout players for other teams in the NFC East, I think I chose 2 different players for the Commanders. He was one of them, so at least I got 50% right. But Frankie Louvu. Who, it was I looked it up, he was the guy in the heat of our missile push conversation last week.
Yes, he was.
He was the missile from the Commanders.
Yes, he was.
But take away that one series of plays, he also was a second-team All-Pro last year in his first season with the Commanders. 8 sacks, which was a career high. Was just all over the field. 7 pass breakups, also a career high for him. You talk about some of the best off-ball linebackers in the NFL. Similar to what you were saying, no one is going to mention Frankie Louvu.
Absolutely not.
The season he had last year, though, he at least belongs in the conversation of among the top players at his position.
Well, just like Bourne came out of nowhere.
Came out of nowhere. That's true.
You know,
I mean, he did have
changes teams.
I will say he did have some level of success with the Panthers, more so than Bond did with the Saints.
Yes, but not to this level.
No one was considering him an all-pro selection. And, you know, maybe it's just Dan Quinn getting the most out of some of these guys because he's obviously a fantastic defensive-minded coach. But Frankie Louvu deserves a lot more recognition than he gets. He is my most underappreciated player for Washington.
And those guys are a great example of how the staff does matter.
Oh, yeah.
You know, coordinators and or position coaches. Think about Dexter Lawrence. Andre Patterson gets here as the Giants defensive line coach. And yes, Wink Martindale was the new DC, and he worked in conjunction with Patterson. But we know about Andre Patterson and the great respect he has around the league. He brought out the best in Leonard Williams. He brought out the best in Dexter Lawrence. Sometimes that staff member can be the guy who unlocks the talent and brings it to another level.
Yeah, I'm not going to, go ahead and say, nor were you saying this, but it's not saying that, Coach Patterson is the reason the sole reason that Dex took a big leap. But let me tell you, it's not a coincidence that Dexter's leap to that all-pro level happened with Andre Patterson's arrival. That is not a coincidence whatsoever. And Dexter would tell you that himself, how big of a role Coach Patterson has played in his growth and development these last couple of years.
Final couple of notes, folks, because that ends our question for the day. Giants season ticket memberships for 2025 are available. You can catch the Giants not only at MetLife Stadium during the season, but there are benefits all year round. There are also kinds of exclusive member accesses that you can get. To learn more about a Giants season ticket membership, visit giants.com/tickets. And, of course, the Giants Huddle podcast. I know you do a lot of the posting. Do you know what's up there this week?
Yes. We actually today posted it was Marcus Bose. I believe it was his offensive line coach at Purdue. I'm blanking on his name at this moment,
okay.
But it is all up on the site. Marcus Johnson is his name. That got posted today. The video, the audio got posted to podcast platforms, talking about Marcus Bowe, how his technique developed, and how Coach Marcus Johnson thinks he's going to fit into the Giants' offensive line room. So that is now up. Over the weekend, we posted all of the Baldy breakdowns.
I did see those.
Of all of the draft picks.
They're really cool.
They are really cool.
He's all over
love
it,
that
man.
we got him in the mix here and he's doing these videos because they're really awesome. There's a video for every draft pick. The last 3 draft picks got combined into one, but each player in the draft class has a Baldy breakdown. Those are all up on the site as well.
Mm-hmm.
Check it out. And I believe that is it.
All right. Folks, again, we remind you that tomorrow, Big Blue Kickoff Live will be moving to 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time, live for an hour, because this way you'll get the complete wrap-up with Matt and John on the OTA and the media availabilities, the coach, the players. Find out all about what's going on here as they start Phase 3 of the offseason program. We're getting closer and closer, Matt. I mean, just seeing the guys out there in helmets today. I know it was only shirts and shorts, but the fact that they had helmets on, my blood started to go a little bit.
I know, and the fact that we got the rookies with the vets. You got the whole team practicing together now.
Yeah.
Obviously, as we mentioned, there's no contact, which that's another reason just to look forward to training camp is you really get to see these guys start going 100%. But yeah, when this OTAs begin is when it really hits you like we are not that far away from real football.
I know.
We got training camp in 2 months? Less than 2 months?
I can't wait, man. I can't wait.
And we got a couple of weeks to get us through. Before we head off, since we do have a little bit of time here, how you feeling about the Knicks tonight?
I was simply just going to say go Knicks at the end of the program, but as long as you asked me, I really, really love the way that they were able to turn that sucker around in the fourth quarter the other night, and Cat was a beast. I see no reason why they won't even it up at 2-2, but there's also no doubt in my mind this is going to go 7 games, and every single one of these games will come down to the final minute. So it's going to be gut-wrenching, nail-biting all the way through, and when you talk about a Game 7 that could go down to the wire as well, and I really think it's going to be that way, there's no telling who's going to win the game and who's going to win the series, especially with the Knicks not having a very good record at home in the playoffs this year.
Yeah.
No telling.
I mean, we are, about 150 minutes into the series, 3 full games, and the point differential between the two teams in all 3 games, I think, is like even, or maybe Indiana is +1 over the Knicks.
Incredible.
We knew that each game is basically going to be a coin flip. Tonight's the same way. If the Knicks can play like they did in the second half, and especially that fourth quarter, there's no stopping them.
Towns was just, wow.
I will say, first of all, with Towns, he got a lot of criticism after game 2. It's nice to see him bounce back with it wasn't a full strong performance because he did start off kind of slow, but when it mattered most, he turned it on.
Keep it going, Cat.
That's why you brought Karl Anthony Towns in.
Yeah.
For performances like that. I forgot what my second point was, but let's go Knicks.
Okay. As always, we're coming to you from the Giants Podcast Studio presented by Hackensack Meridian Health. Keep getting better. This has been Big Blue Kickoff Live presented by Cadillac, the official luxury vehicle of the New York Football Giants. As a reminder, tomorrow, put down the number 201-939-4513. It starts live at 1:30 p.m. And if you missed any portion of today's program, catch it on the Giants Archive, podcast platforms everywhere, giants.com/podcasts, and of course, the Giants mobile app. For Matt Citak, I'm Paul Dottino. We'll see you next time.